All right, it looks like it's 3 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Hutchins. I'm a senior research specialist at the Early College Research Center, the SERVE Center at UNC Greensboro. I want to welcome everyone to this session. We're going to be talking about the impact of assessing the impact of dual enrollment in the context of COVID-19. I hope you've attended a lot of exciting sessions thus far, and I hope this one also ends up being an exciting session for you. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been working in the space of dual enrollment, early college research for about 10 years now, primarily here in North Carolina, but I've also been working on some evaluations looking at the implementation of early colleges or early college strategies in other states. My research interest is really around some of the advising that goes along with dual enrollment and how students make decisions about whether they want to participate or not. And I'm also interested in what we call the non-college bound or work bound students, which may seem a little strange for being involved in dual enrollment, but studying students that don't plan to go on. But from my perspective, I look at dual enrollment as kind of that lifeline and like, what can students do who don't really want to or don't plan to go on further? What can they do in high school through dual enrollment to really help them to enter the workforce more quickly? So I want to take a minute to introduce or let Julie Edmonds, my colleague, introduce herself. Julie, do you mind?
Hi, everyone. Julie Edmonds. I'm director of the Early College Research Center and been doing research on dual enrollment and early college for about the last 20 years. So delighted to be here.
Thanks, Julie. And I want to acknowledge that Brian Phillips and Christine Mulhern with Rand Corporation, they're not presenting today, but they really took the lead on this impact analysis that we're going to present. So I want to acknowledge them. So I want to start out by saying this study is brought to you by the Evaluation of Career and College Promise Grant. And I want to say mostly brought to you by this because we're pulling in some information from some other studies that we have going on. But just to give you a little context, this is a 5-year research practice partnership grant funded by IES. And the goal is to use rigorous methods to study the impact, implementation, and cost of career and college promise here in North Carolina. And in addition, part of the grant is designed to help develop agency partnerships capacity to work with researchers and to use data to improve career and college promise. And so here at the Early College Research Center, we're the lead on this project, but our agency partners are the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and the North Carolina Community College System, and our research partners are the Rand Corporation. And I just want to say personally, it's really great to have the opportunity to work with these other organizations and really work together for a common cause. So just a little background. I think most of the folks in this session or at the conference will know what I'm about to say, but I just want to make sure we're grounded and thinking about COVID and post-secondary enrollment impacts. And as I think we all know, that the recent analysis indicates that there's been a drop, or there was a drop in immediate college enrollment during the COVID years. And that drop was most significantly felt by community colleges across the country, with a 13% drop in enrollment immediately. But despite this drop in community college enrollments, there's some data looking. John Fink has some dashboards and a blog that he's written about this, and I pulled a little bit of his information that for students under 18, looking nationally using the IPEDS and the National Student Clearinghouse data, pre-pandemic enrollment growth, there was considerable growth in dual enrollment coming into the pandemic, but nationally it looks like things kind of leveled off or stalled or maybe slightly increased between fall 2019 and fall 2021. But in looking from fall 2021 to fall 2022, his analysis shows that enrollment grew by almost 12%. And he also showed that dual enrollment grew in 30 states during the pandemic, with double digit growth in 17 of 17 states. So that gives us a little bit of context for this. But one of the questions that we want to grapple with today is about whether students who are taking part in dual enrollment courses might have had different experiences. So that's a piece of what we're going to talk about today. Just to give you a little bit of context, and you may have heard this in other sessions, but I want to give you a little background of, because we're going to be focusing on dual enrollment in North Carolina. And so in 2011, North Carolina kind of consolidated all of its dual enrollment programs into this Career and College Promise. You're going to hear me say CCP a lot. I'm going to try to say dual enrollment, but I might end up saying CCP. But in North Carolina, students really have three options for participating in dual enrollment, and two that you see at the kind of the traditional high schools are the college transfer pathway and the career and technical education pathway. So the college transfer pathway is a dual enrollment. Students can take dual enrollment that lead to an associate's degree or that meet the general ed requirements to go on to a 4-year college. So the CTE pathway, students take dual enrollment classes to earn college credits leaning towards technical credentials or some kind of workforce-based major. And then the third opportunity we have in North Carolina, what's called the cooperative innovative high schools. And these in North Carolina, most but not all of these, or many of these, are early colleges. But the idea here is students can go to these CIHSs, earn an associate's degree or 2 years of college credit at an approved high school that's partnered with a college or a university. So we're going to present results from some staff interviews that we've collected on the implementation side of Career and College Promise. And so our driving questions there: how was implementation of CCP impacted by the pandemic? This is really just getting the perspective of the folks that we were talking to over the span of our project, which spanned the whole life of COVID. We started our collection before, but we were also there as it was unfolding. And another question we have is from the staff's perspectives: how did COVID-19 differentially impact the post-secondary plans of students participating in CCP compared to students not participating in CCP? And Julie's going to be talking a little bit about using the administrative data to look at how pre-COVID-19 cohorts compared to COVID-19 cohorts in terms of the college credits earned and immediate enrollment in post-secondary education. And I should have said, and I'll say this again later, but we're only going to be presenting data on that college transfer pathway. So of those three pathways, she's going to be focusing on that. But before we get into that, I want to say, I want us to leave this meeting with an optimistic closure. I think there are plenty of opportunities to talk about the challenges and the negatives of COVID. And I don't want us to artificially say that great things came about. But in events like this, there are opportunities. And, things like this push people to collaborate and work together to serve each other and serve the needs of students. So what I have created, and I hope this will work, we'll try it out and see, we've created a Padlet. So you have a QR code you can use here. And Julie, if you don't mind, you might have already dropped that in the chat. There's also a link. This QR code is going to be available in various slides. And what I would like for you to do is, while the presentation is going on, if there are opportunities that you're aware of, things that you experienced, anything that you can share from your perspective that emerged during the pandemic, that we can leverage to enhance dual enrollment in terms of quality, access, and equity moving forward, So not a lot of structure here. Use your imagination. If there's like an article you read that was really great, if there's something your institution did and they produced something, we're looking for big and small ideas. I mean, if you say, hey, we learned how to get electronic documents signed using this program, that's an incredible takeaway that someone's going to leave this meeting from, leave this meeting saying, yeah, that's really helpful for me. So we're going to look at that at the end, but please, while this is going on, if you don't mind, and I'm going to show you what that's going to look like with a screen grab. But let me just go to that. I don't want to pull this up live in case my internet starts having trouble or something, but this is, if you go to that link, this is what it's going to look like. And just very quickly, all you have to do is go down to this yellow circle with the plus, push that. It's going to pop up with a box. It's going to ask you to give it a title or give some type of description. Just fill that out, share what you'd like to share, and then hit enter, and it will post it on this wall. And we're going to leave this up, I guess, until Padlet goes away. It will be here. So you can use it now. You can look at it later. If you want to add something to it in a week, I encourage you to. So let me jump in and just start talking about the methods a little bit. There's this qualitative component, and then I'm going to ask Julie to talk a little bit about the quantitative component. But um, over the last 3 years, actually 4 years, we've been doing implementation interviews for the CCP evaluation in 8 districts where we've talked to district leaders, high school and community college representatives who are involved in dual enrollment in their district. So we've talked to a combination of folks at traditional high schools, early colleges, career academies, things like that. So we're going to really be pulling on those interviews. But there's also 2 other studies that we're going to be pulling from. We have another study called the High School CTE Advising Study. It's also funded by IES, but through a different funding mechanism. And most of the schools that we visited for this CTE Advising Study were part of the CCP kind of cohort of districts that we're reaching out to. And then finally, we have a 3rd study called the COVID Post-Secondary Transition Study, where there is some overlap in the districts that are part of the larger evaluation. But this study, we talked to high school counselors, community college and university counselors and advisors about the overall post-secondary enrollment experiences, not just related to dual enrollment, but just kind of that study is looking at general patterns for high school graduates in North Carolina. One important caveat I want to point out at this point is, in a way, only one of these studies has questions directly focused on the impact of COVID. So when we were doing our interviews for CCP, we didn't have questions that asked about the impact of COVID, but we coded any reference to COVID as it had, as we were told things about how implementation had been impacted. Same with the CTE advising study. Now, with the COVID post-secondary transition study, although we were looking at students in general, there was a question in that interview protocol where we asked about dual enrollment specifically, and that's going to really inform, you know, when we talk about staff's perception of whether being involved in dual enrollment kind of helped those students, more easily weather the storm during COVID. So we coded everything with a COVID code, and then we coded those references into themes, and that's we're going to present at a very high level today some of the takeaways from that. One of the things I think is really neat is we're going to pull some of the data from the North Carolina Community College System dashboards to kind of supplement our presentation. So we'll show you some numbers of what dual enrollment looks like in North Carolina from the data that they have posted available. And I'm going to turn it over to Julie to speak a little bit about the quantitative methods.
Sure. So the question that we were trying to understand here is, because in the broader CCP program, we're looking at the impact of CCP participation on students. And we were wondering whether that impact differed for students that were in these COVID cohorts than for students that were in the previous cohorts. And so we use the same analytic approach that we do with our other study. So basically, we're comparing CCP participants. So in this case, we're going to look at the college transfer pathway participants. These are 11th and 12th graders with students who are not taking any type of dual enrollment pathway. So we're comparing them. Both groups may have taken AP courses. And then for that comparison group, because we know that students that pick or choose to take dual enrollment are different than students who don't choose to take dual enrollment. So we just can't make a straight up comparison, right? That the two groups won't kind of be the same. So we have to, what we do is use a process called weighting, statistical weighting. And so they make them look more like the treatment group. So our comparison group looks very similar on demographic characteristics, absences, suspensions, test scores, 9th and 10th grade GPA, and 9th and 10th grade course taking, including CTE course taking, AP, and honors level course taking. And then we do analyses that compare the outcomes for those two groups. We divided our sample into the pre-COVID cohorts. So these were students who were anticipated to graduate from high school in 2014 through 2019, and then the COVID cohorts. And these are students who are anticipated to graduate in 2020 and then 2021. And we're looking at the impacts for those two sets of cohorts and determining whether they're different from each other.
Thanks, Julie. So first, we're going to start off talking about the impact of COVID-19 on dual enrollment implementation and course taking. And some of that's going to come from the interviews, the dashboards, and then Julie's going to present a part from the impact study that she just talked about. So I'm going to talk about themes that emerged from the interviews. I want to go ahead and say these slides are going to look a little busy, and that's because one of the things we're trying to do is lift up the voices of the folks that we interviewed. So we have a lot of these sidebar boxes that you can read along. I'm not going to read these, but it's going to give you a little more context for some of the things that I'm going to say. So sorry the slides look a little busy, but I think it's worth it to give you some real voices from the people we spoke to. One of the first themes that emerged, and I want to say I don't want to claim that what we learned is representative of what was going on across the state, because we did pick the districts that we picked, but we did not go to all 115 districts, and we did not use a sampling approach that would allow us to make those kinds of inferences. So I just want to be clear about that. But one of the themes that emerged was really, despite the pandemic challenges, interest in CCP or dual enrollment really grew based on all the folks that we talked to. One theme that you could imagine is that initially CCP enrollment dropped off and that there was a spike in student withdrawals that were reported early in the pandemic. Again, this is from the staff telling us that initial abrupt shift to online, everything kind of going sideways. There were starting in March of 2020, real challenges there. Having said that, over the span of the 2 years during COVID that we were doing our interviews, we learned that interest in CCP has grown. And one of the things that I think is interesting that's emerging from our work is we know, I think nationally and even in North Carolina, CTE dual enrollment is something where there's a lot of attention. One of the things we learned from the folks that we talked to is some told us that maybe COVID itself prompted some of that interest. We had several community college advisors, high school counselors, early college advisors telling us that that they were seeing cases of parents and students coming in and being very specific in the conversations about, like, what can I do to immediately, help my child, take advantage of work opportunities. And there's something that's, I think, emerging from our interviews that with the pandemic setting in and a lot of folks, including some students, having to go into the workforce, it really caused some conversations about what can I do when I'm in high school. Tell me more about this dual enrollment, and is this something that can help me get right into a job? So that's one of the themes I think that's interesting that emerged. Another theme that emerged is staff in general reported growth in CCP opportunities, and really attributed that to the expanded online course offerings. We heard examples of of advisors saying, we used to just have this one English course offered in person, but now we have 4 online courses. Even though that in-person course went away, there were 4 courses that were offered kind of somewhat in its place, or additional opportunities. Also kind of being forced to go online. There were some districts that were already, if they were not offering online, they were considering moving to online courses to deal with some transportation issue and scheduling issues and things like that. And I think that moving to online really forced those conversations in a major way. The one caveat I want to point out, that some of the shifts that we're seeing, even though the things I'm talking about were definitely talked about in relation to COVID, there are these broader policy things, policy changes going on in the state, and then the program itself is maturing. So some of this interest may just be unrelated to COVID, and just the fact that dual enrollment's just becoming more popular. People know they're seeing their friends taking, other students taking it. So I want to put that caveat out there. So one of the things I want to just take a second to show is, we've done these interviews. We learned a lot about what the staff said to us about what they were seeing in terms of students participating or not in dual enrollment. This is from the Community College dashboard, North Carolina Community College system dashboard. And I want to show, this actually is just the transfer pathway and the CTE pathway participation. The one thing I want to say is, in the opening session yesterday, Dr. Jeff Cox, who's the community college system president, commented, and he gave some specific numbers. And I said, please let his numbers match what I have here. And they did, because I was like, oh, I don't want to come up with something different. So we were looking at the same numbers. But in terms of, these green bars are the college transfer pathway. And starting in 2019-20, you actually see pretty level, maybe a slight increase in 2021. You see a big bump in the number of students taking at least one dual enrollment course in the college transfer pathway in North Carolina. You see this bump in 2022-23. This yellow bar right here is the number of students taking dual enrollment in the CTE pathway. I want to make one comment. One thing that we did hear from our interviews, and I think this is what's driving what you see here in 2019-2020, there are about 12,000 students participating. It drops to 8,000, but you see it slowly climbing back up over the next 2 years. One of the things that we heard from our interviews is, while those gen ed college courses could somewhat more easily shift online, CTE, particularly courses that had internship or clinical experiences, those things could not really easily transfer online. And so students may have really missed out on opportunities to do some CTE dual enrollment during this time, unless districts found some ways to adapt to that. And I think that's reflected in this drop right here from 1920 to 21. I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to turn it over to Julie. So we're moving away from kind of what it looks like across the state in terms of that publicly available dashboard data. I'm going to let her talk a little bit about what we found from our impact study.
Sure. So one of the outcomes that we were looking at was the number of college credits that students earned while they were in high school. So these are college credits earned while they're in high school. And so what this table shows is the number of college credits earned through CCP. And the CCP students could have earned additional credits through taking an advanced placement course and earning and passing the exam associated with that course. The comparison students, we're showing the number of credits earned by the comparison students, and that's primarily students who have earned college credits through the advanced placement, through passing an advanced placement exam. And again, this is only for the college transfer students. That first row there shows the number of college credits earned by the COVID cohorts. And so what we see is, actually, on average, the COVID cohorts were earning slightly more credits in 17.1, then they actually earned, the CCP students were actually earning slightly more credits during the COVID years than they were in the pre-COVID years, which is kind of interesting. So that second row is the number of college credits earned by the pre-COVID cohorts. So we've got 17 college credits for CCP students compared to 15.2 credits for CCP students in the pre-COVID years. In both cases, this is much more than the comparison students were earning. So our comparison students were earning many fewer college credits in both time periods. However, if you look at kind of the relationship there, what you see is that for the comparison group, the number of college credits earned by those COVID cohorts is actually less than the number of college credits earned by the pre-COVID cohorts. So the comparison group actually earned fewer college credits during COVID, while our CCP group actually increased the number of college credits that they were earning during COVID. I think some of what might be happening there is that there were some challenges with advanced placement and having the advanced placement exams. I know I have children in this 2020 graduating cohort, and I know they did not do as well on their advanced placement exams as they might have done otherwise. And so I think that's part of the story there. But it's interesting to see that actually our CCP, the college credits being earned by CCP students, actually increased over the COVID period, again, for the college transfer pathway.
Thanks, Julie. I want to shift back to one more piece of information from the community college dashboard. And this is just to really set up the next couple of themes I'm going to talk to, because as you can imagine, going online was something that was mentioned quite regularly, the staff that we talked to. This graph right here is for both the transfer pathway students and the CTE pathway students, and it's looking at the percentage of students taking at least one online course by pathway. And this green bar is for the college transfer pathway. And what I'd like for you to notice here is in 1920, there's about 73% of students took at least one online course. That dropped to virtually everyone, 93% in 2021 took at least one online course. And that corresponds to what we heard from most everyone we talked to. But another theme that came out is several people talked about this idea that online is here to stay. And I think that's borne out in the data here, looking first at the college transfer pathway. Even moving into the next 2 years, you still have 86 and 87% of students taking at least one online class, that is higher than the pre-COVID years. In the CTE pathway, you do have fewer students taking on at least one online course. It's 45% in 1920, jumping to 65%, and then dropping back down to 53 and 53%. I do want to point out students in the CTE pathway are taking CTE courses, but they might also be taking some of those gen ed courses as well. I think that's an important. So we don't know which courses might be driving that, but it could be that it's we don't know, but I just want to say that. So I've got a slide. As was anything, when you talk to people, you kind of get two sides to an answer, and I think one of the things that emerged from our interviews is some of the individuals that we talked to said there were some positive perceptions of online course taking, and there are some negative perceptions. So I want to start with the positive here. I kind of already talked about the online courses expanded some opportunities in some situations. But one theme that emerged is online course taking skills improved among students. And there's a really great quote from a counselor who said, just because a student knows how to use social media or TikTok does not mean they know how to take an online college level course. And I think that's something we heard. We did hear that for some students, the interest in taking online courses increased. And another thing that we heard is by having this forced shift to online course taking, it really forced students to confront their beliefs about themselves as online learners. And let me unpack that a little bit. We did some interviews with students before COVID set in, actually, just a few weeks before COVID set in a few months. And this idea of preferences for taking online versus face to face courses seemed to come up as a factor in why and when students would take online courses. One of the questions we had is, are they kind of avoiding this opportunity to take online courses? What's happening? We really learned from several individuals that we talked to, it really forced it for students. And so for some students, they did it and said, oh, this is not bad, or I like this, or this is working really well for me. So that's one side of the coin. But then the other side of the coin, we also heard some negatives about online. And one of the main ones is there were some concerns that students were missing out kind of on the full range of college experience, going to a college campus, those things that really help students make that connection with the college that they're doing their dual enrollment through, that online might rob them in some cases of those opportunities. We learned that some students avoided online. They really still preferred face-to-face course taking in general. But then we also heard that for certain subjects, I think math was a subject where we heard people tell us that that's one that students really, they didn't feel like they were going to be as successful in some classes versus other classes. So there might have been a tendency to avoid those classes. And for some students, having to go online confirmed that they did not like online learning. So it could be a negative experience, but at least it helped kind of give them the information that that wasn't something that worked for them. We also learned that students struggled. The students who struggled more online, and again, we didn't have a specific question about this in relation to COVID. This is just what kind of came up in our conversations, and the staff that we talked to said there were students definitely with just basic internet access issues, living particularly in rural areas, not having internet at home. That really created a huge barrier. Students taking online CCP courses for the first time. If students had already taken an online dual enrollment course, they seem to kind of know the routine. But those that were new to taking it had trouble. And also in general, we learned that just going through COVID and taking your regular high school courses while taking your online courses or your college courses was a real challenge. And students who needed more monitoring and support. That was a real challenge to reach those students, particularly in the beginning phases in that first year of COVID where everything was virtual. And we also learned that students with family hardship, like it was common for us to hear counselors say, when I had a student withdraw and I would ask them, there would be something going on at home, either something with a family or the student having to work. And some advisors and counselors told us that just sometimes the students were alone by themselves while their parents were at work. And so there wasn't anyone there to monitor them. Stepping back from the online portion just a little bit, some other challenges that we heard is some students were not. There was concern that some students were not ready for dual enrollment as a result. We know there was a tremendous amount of learning loss going on, and that impacts a lot of students, including those considering dual enrollment. But I think one of the things that was kind of interesting that we learned, and this has been talked about in other sessions in the conference, there are some students that kind of in ninth and 10th grade, they might not really be ready, but something clicks, the blossom, they bloom. There's a principal that's made that point. Like there's some students that just bloom, and by 11th or 12th grade, they're ready to jump in and take an online, a college course. And that for some students that was stalled, and that was a concern. I already mentioned monitoring the students. I will say that one of the things we've learned from implementation, particularly in the traditional high schools, is there There are schools that have students take their dual enrollment like in a media center, being supported by someone who's kind of monitoring them, even though they're taking it online at the community college. They're coming to their high school and take it. That really went away during this time, at least initially, and that was a real challenge. Another challenge was just the advising and awareness building around CCP. We learned from our implementation study that going into the middle schools and having conversations with students, that couldn't happen. Having counselors going into classrooms and telling students about dual enrollment opportunities, or having school-wide assemblies, those kinds of activities were not occurring, and that was a real challenge. And also that maybe at least initially trying to get some of that information out online, we heard that it just wasn't necessarily resonating with the students. That just online was so different that it was hard to really share that information. This next point, I think, is really important. If your goal is just to enroll students in dual enrollment courses, this next point won't be a problem for you. But I think if your goal is to help students think about the coursework that they're taking in relation to future college opportunities and careers, those paired exploration activities that really go and help students figure out where they want to go and what they want to do, that was a challenge. That most of those things, college and career fairs, really help students um, develop those interests and ideas about what they want to do. Those went away. We also learned that just building relationships during COVID was very challenging. Connecting with students, we had advisors in North Carolina. We have some advisors like career coaches from the community college system, that aren't necessarily in the schools every day, or they're not high school employees. Like, sometimes building those connections with students can be difficult if they don't or aren't given access to the buildings, can't come in, or try and do things online. So there was some of that. Collaborating with families, we heard, was a real challenge. Making contact with families when students needed support. um, just in general, staff collaborations across entities was a real challenge. And community and school partnerships as well. And that's really, a lot of those things, we learned. Internship opportunities and things like that really had to stand down during this time. A few opportunities that we learned about: this idea of faculty and staff themselves, several talked about just building this culture of being more comfortable with being online and supporting students online. We had several tell us, it used to be that the advising we did was through an email, or the student would have to come to our office. And there was more of this, like, let's jump on a Zoom call or something like that. And that was something that positive that we heard that came out. Greater use of technology to share advising materials. We heard a lot of examples of advisors putting information online, how-to videos, because if they're having trouble reaching students, they could at least create things or beef up what they had online to help students go in and watch these how-to videos or interest videos on what courses and things they might want to take. And one other thing we heard is there's greater collaboration between high schools and the community colleges to address technology challenges. A lot of examples of sharing Wi-Fi hotspots, loaning laptops across entities where they could. I think a lot of this was obviously done out of necessity, uh, particularly during the initial phases. But I think that really shows the collaboration between entities really kind of coming together, trying to support students. Now, just we want to spend a few minutes talking about the impact of COVID-19 on students' immediate enrollment in post-secondary education. And I'm just going to share one slide, and then I'm going to kick it over to Julie. When we asked staff about their beliefs about students taking part in dual enrollment, they generally reported to us that participation in CCP positively impacted students' post-secondary experiences, or what they thought the students were going to do. And they gave us a couple of answers for how they thought about this. First, for students actually in dual enrollment, there was less uncertainty about what college was like because from their perspective, they were in college. They were taking a college course during a pandemic, so they knew a little. There was a little more certainty. I mean, there was certainly um, less certainty about what things would be like moving forward, but they kind of had a taste of what college courses were like. We also heard that the students participating in dual enrollment generally staff believe they're more likely to have a plan or are a little more committed to what they want to do or kind of have a sense of what they wanted to do. One that came up really frequently is taking and being successful in these dual enrollment classes really helped them build confidence about being successful moving forward. So they had a they had a sense. Well, I've been successful in these college classes. If I'm going on after school, that it kind of gave them a template of what what success looks like. Another thing we learned, just very practically speaking, it helped. This came up particularly at the community colleges. Um, help students build direct pathways with the community colleges. Like they were there taking their dual enrollment. It gave them comfort to be there, and for many of them, not sure long term what COVID was going to how it's going to impact them. This, I'll go here. I'll start here. I already have this connection. So those are a couple of things that we heard from the staff that we talked to. Now I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Sure. So what this slide shows here is basically the results. So the enrollment in 4-year and 2-year institutions for the pre-COVID cohorts, and then the average for the COVID cohorts. So we're kind of averaging the enrollment for all of our pre-COVID cohorts and then our 2 post-COVID cohorts. Moving forward, I don't know if we're going to do that or not, because I think there's a suggestion that there's a substantial dip in fall and then a rebound that occurred in the fall of 21. And so we're kind of masking that rebound a little bit here. I think that initial dip and rebound. But anyway, so to look at this chart here, so the dark blue line is the college transfer pathway students. The orangish line is our comparison students. The difference between the 2 lines is the impact in that year. So the impact of CCP, so participating in the college transfer pathway, on enrollment. And so what we see is that we see, if we look at, and sorry, one other thing to point out is the solid line is 4-year enrollment and the dotted line is 2-year enrollment. So if we're looking at 4-year enrollment, so that's those solid lines on the top, in our pre-COVID cohort, we see that 64% of our college transfer pathway students are enrolled compared to 63% of our comparison group. So there's a slight positive impact. There's a slight difference in enrollment. And then if we look at what happens in the COVID cohort, so just follow that line down, and basically you see that there was a decline in immediate 4-year enrollment to 55% for our college transfer pathway, but the decline was actually larger for the orange students, for the comparison students. And so the impact there on 4-year enrollment is actually larger for our COVID cohorts than it is for the pre-COVID cohorts. If you're looking at 2-year enrollment, and this pattern is actually slightly different than the pattern that we see for enrollment more broadly, or for community college enrollment more broadly, but this is again for dual enrollment students. So what we see is that in the pre-COVID years, 29% of our college transfer pathway participants immediately had some immediate enrollment in 2 years. And then compared to 23% of our treatment 23% of the comparison students. That increased to 31% in the COVID years, and the 23% remained about stable. So our comparison group remained about stable. So we see that our impact is larger in the COVID years than in the pre-COVID years. So the impact is larger for both the 2-year and the 4-year enrollments. This suggests that COVID is kind of having a mitigating impact. That the college transfer pathway is having a mitigating impact on the influence of COVID on post-secondary enrollment. And that's actually very consistent with what Brian was just saying about some of those perceptions of impact. And so that the students who are taking the college transfer pathway, in particular in this case, are really seem to be kind of better off, and seem to be better able to weather the downturn that was associated with COVID, which is kind of an interesting finding, and not necessarily one that we were expecting. But again, it makes a lot of sense when we compare it to the qualitative data that Brian was sharing.
Thank you, Julie. We got some key takeaways here from the interviews. I mean, just some high level takeaways. Interest in CCP seemed to continue to grow even during COVID, particularly in CTE dual enrollment. Definitely that abrupt shift online created a lot of challenges, but we also learned that it created some long-term opportunities, maybe some expansion of some courses. But there were some students that seemed to do well making that transition online, but some students that really seemed to struggle. And that's something I think we need to think more about and study, those patterns more carefully. It's really difficult to promote CCP, to really advise students and particularly help monitor and support students remotely in those remote classes. And I think that was a real challenge that came out of our conversations with the staff that we talked to. But the perception among staff was students who were participating in dual enrollment, it really helped them to build confidence and really be prepared for that uncertain future of what COVID was going to look like once they graduated. So from the administrative data, Julie just talked about, the dual enrollment students in the college transfer pathway earned more college credits during COVID compared to the comparison group who earned fewer. And the dual enrollment in the college transfer pathway did seem to, based on our data, mitigate the negative impacts of COVID on post-secondary enrollment. So we have 3 minutes left. I see. I apologize for us going a little bit long on our talk. But before we end, does anyone have any questions? Or one thing, Julie and I are not experts on COVID. We're using the information we have in our own skill sets. Is there anything you think we've missed? Anything you think we need to consider moving forward? Something, if anyone has any ideas pointing us in certain directions. I'm going to pause now for questions and comments in the time we have left.
We are a small group, so feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like.
Yeah, please feel free.
It's also the last formal session of a 2-day conference, so
Yeah.
I'm a little worn out myself. So.
No, I completely understand. I'm the same way. And I was going to say, please keep thinking if you have any questions. I was looking over at the Padlet to see if anything come in, and I do not see anything. I hope that was not because of some kind of technology issue. So, as you're thinking about any questions or any opportunities you want to share, that Padlet is still going to be up. Please feel free after this session to add, because I think we really want to know what positives came out of this. What did people learn? What promising practices seem to really help? So. Any last questions with the last minute we have? All right. In that case, I want to thank everyone for coming to the session. I hope you had a great time overall at this conference, and I appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time. Thank you so much, and everyone have a great afternoon.